Back here on the Meat Speak podcast, powered by the certified Angus beef brand, Brian Shaw, coming to you from, I don't know, what's this building called? Like the overall building.
The Ohio City Firehouse.
The Ohio City Firehouse. It's been around for more than 100 years in Ohio City, which if you're not from Northeast Ohio, Ohio City it's Cleveland, right? It's Cleveland zip code, right?
That's right.
Just across the Cuyahoga River. Of course, the Ohio City Firehouse is home to one of the most discussed restaurants. I say restaurant, but really, man, you guys are it's like a project, right? I mean, you guys always have something of note going on here, where it's not, to call it a restaurant, I feel like is probably selling you guys short in terms of what all is going. It's a mad science lab some days. Some days it's just a lot of different things. That said, I wrote an intro, so I might as well read it. Our guest today is returning to the podcast for the second time, but fear not, because there's plenty left to discuss, given his discovery of what's become a never-ending rabbit hole using Koji mold in food production. As an author, he's written one of the most important cookbooks that can be found in many a chef's arsenal today. As a chef and restaurant owner, he boasts multiple James Beard nominations, the best sandwich in Cleveland as voted on by locals, and his restaurant was once called the best delicatessen in America by the great Daniel Boulud. Please welcome back to the podcast, Jeremy Umansky. How you doing, man?
I'm so red and blushing right now because I don't necessarily think about those things on a daily basis, and to hear it all at once, I was like, oh.
Right?
I was like, who are you talking about? What chef is he interviewing?
I don't know if you knew this, but you guys are kind of a big deal, you know? So Larder Delicatessen and Bakery, you guys have been around since 2018 was when you opened.
Yeah, April. We're actually just a few weeks away from our 4th anniversary.
4 years in. How are things going, man? Obviously, your first 4 years, you had some road bumps that you guys had no control over with the, I think most restaurants that open don't have to deal with a global pandemic in the middle of their first 3 years. But how are things going?
Overall, things have been really well for us. We've been super grateful to our community for the support we get from them. We have a ton of regulars. It's just things have been moving along really nice for us. So
excellent.
Yeah.
And if you go back, if you spend some time, and if you're listening to this, we always encourage people to use the power of Google, right? Because Google is quite handy. I always appreciate the things that I listen to that make me want to go a little deeper down the rabbit hole. Take some time and Google Jeremy Umansky and Larder, and we'll have links in the bio of this episode. See some of the things that you're doing, and you'll start to get a grasp of why this is such a bit of a rabbit hole for what you guys are doing. Before we really get into some of that stuff,
can I say on that note,
please.
Too, that's kind of, typically around this mark, a lot of chefs and restaurateurs are either have a second concept open, they're working on those sort of thing. We haven't done that yet because we have so much going on at any given time internally. Yeah. That, that's where we're at.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, and I will tell you, there are a couple recent times that this has happened. When we have chefs for certified Angus beef, we like to bring a lot of chefs to our facility, to our meat lab where we break down carcasses. If you are listening and if you're interested in doing that, slide into our DMs and let's have a chat. But we like to give those visiting chefs from outside of Northeast Ohio a taste of what Cleveland is about. And Cleveland has a rich history, especially of Eastern European cuisine, and we always like to bring them here, right? And this is a Jewish
and thank you for that.
Oh man, thank you. I can't think of a chef who has come in here that has not walked out with their head spinning or inspired by what you guys are doing. But can you tell us, for those who haven't been, tell us about Larder and what you guys are all about and what you're doing now?
Yeah, so we are an Eastern European delicatessen with Jewish deli roots. We kind of make this distinction because as we were kind of dissecting and looking at what a Jewish deli is, you kind of think it's one thing. You think it's the pastrami, kosher style foods, right? No pork, no shellfish. In some cases not even having cheese on a sandwich, right? So no Reubens, that sort of thing. But when we really started looking at all these Jewish delis that we found, or I shouldn't say all, because we're in this just starting this resurgence of the Jewish deli. It almost went extinct. But we saw things like bacon turkey clubs, and get a tongue sandwich with smoked cheddar on it, and this sort of thing. And I was like, so then what is a Jewish deli? Unless you distinctly keep kosher, and follow those dietary laws, what Jewish food is, what a Jewish delicatessen is, it's all morphed, it's evolved. So we really wanted to, with this concept, harken back to what a delicatessen would have been like, what you would have seen 150 years ago in maybe New York City, or definitely large parts of Europe, especially Germany, Poland, even going into parts of Ukraine and that sort of thing. So we really wanted to take historical inspiration for how those businesses operated and apply that with modern sensibilities to today's menu. So that's what we've seek out to do. And we didn't want to be a deli. We wanted to be a delicatessen. We found this historical line in the sand, give or take around World War II. Up until that point, delis were delicatessens. Mm-hmm. And at the delicatessen, they made the pickles in barrels there. They salted the meats and cured them there. All these things were done in-house. They were canning preserves and all sorts of things. And each delicatessen was known for like a few items that they were really, really good at. So you'd go to one for maybe your smoked fish. You'd go to another for your pastrami, and then maybe your pickles at another, So we wanted to harken back to that because World War II came around, and leading up to that, car culture and diners and everything, and most of the delicatessens flipped to a diner model, and they became delis. And we wanted to go back to a period in time before that.
Yeah, because when I think of a deli, I think of cold cuts, sliced however thin you want them to on a whole grain mustard sandwich, and I mean.
Sure. And that's like your American pop culture deli, right? Yeah. But like the concept of delicatessen, I mean, everybody from the Ukrainians to the Spanish to the Italians, like they all have their own different words for them. Mm-hmm. Delicatessen is the German word, but these specialty shops that specialized in fermented foods, cured foods, really hearty whole grain bread production, those sorts of things. That's really what we wanted to focus on. And we didn't want to be a deli. We didn't want to be diner influenced. Yeah. Which, even going into our concept, finding a space and everything, we found space in a building that was built in 1854. Yeah.
Well, which closely aligns to the traditional delicatessen that you're trying to be.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, talk about the food that you guys put out. Obviously, we talk at length. Obviously, we're biased being, beef people, meatheads. Obviously, you have a fantastic pastrami. It's it's the procedure that it's done is what makes it so special as well. I mean, it tastes fantastic, but it's also very interesting the way it gets from start to finish. Obviously, the chicken sandwich gets a lot of press, but you guys have a lot of those traditional old-timey dishes. Things like gefilte fish, and things like that. Yeah, I guess talk about that. I mean, these are things you don't see most places in, especially Cleveland, Ohio, or really anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, really, you have to go to a kind of tried and true branded Jewish deli to find a lot of those dishes. Things like gefilte fish. I mean, this is a very, very old preparation, and it's essentially pate made from carp. Is essentially what it was, and gefilte itself, in that word is a Yiddish word, and it literally means stuffed. So traditionally, you take a massive carp. Carp can get really big. You would fillet and bone it out in a way that you kept the tail, the skin, and the head intact. Take out the meat, get rid of the bones, grind everything up, mix it with black pepper, with onion. We use Koji in ours. And then you'd make this really nice force meat. There's matzo meal in it. You need some breadcrumbs. We use the matzo meal. And then traditionally it would be stuffed back into the skin, slow poached, and then chilled and served the next day. We over the past, maybe 20 years, gefilte fish has really seen a little bit of a resurgence. It's a weird word.
Yeah.
Gefilte.
It's fun to say. It makes you feel,
if you have no reference of Jewish food or Yiddish or anything, you hear gefilte and you're like, gefilte fish? What kind of fish is that? It's just, it sounds weird,
Yeah.
But, we decided when we would work with different ingredients here at Larder that we would source as close to the restaurant as possible. We're 3 blocks from Lake Erie.
Yeah.
You will hardly ever see salmon here. In fact, the only time we've really brought salmon in has been salmon eggs that we've had literally a friend in Alaska send us to make caviar. So we use all these lake fish. Carp's a huge one. And it's a delicious fish. It's relatively inexpensive. And it goes a long way. So, started making this gefilte fish. And then it came about, well, how do we make gefilte fish sensible for today's people?
Yeah.
Me being a Jewish man growing up with, I'd help my grandmother make it when I was a kid and even as an adult for Passover and some holidays. I had exposure to it at a young age when my palate was developing. So how do you say, hey, I've got a ground carp pate, right? A fish that people don't really either know about or think is dirty because it's a freshwater fish and muddy and silty and all that. So how do we take that, put modern flavor profiles on it, get people to enjoy doing it? So one of the ways that you do that is what they've been doing in Britain for a very long time. They would take that mixture and kind of form it into a burger patty and sear it off. And then you'd have this seared gefilte fish they'd serve with raw onion and horseradish and all, the traditional accoutrements. But we were like, this is an awesome burger.
Yeah.
This is an incredible fish burger. Get some cheese on there, some nice slaw, some pickled onions, some good sauce. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Other times we make the full loaves of gefilte fish, and then we'll bread them in matzah meal and rye breadcrumbs, and then we'll fry it up, and we'll do it as a fried fish sandwich. We call that the North Coast fillet of fish. We serve it in different ways, and it's, we hear all the time from people who say, we're open 4 years. When you guys make gefilte fish, this is one of the only places I can find it on a menu.
Yeah.
And traditionally too, gefilte fish, after people stop because of the amount of work and stuffing the skin and doing that whole preparation, people just started making the force meat and then making like a meatball and poaching them off.
Yeah.
So even now, to go to a Jewish deli, some places do loaves like we'll do, other places do balls, but you get a platter of like this hunk of fish or slice of fish, some boiled carrots, a little bit of lettuce, and you got to kind of do something yourself. And we were like, no, that doesn't work for people who've never experienced it, right? If I'm going to give you a slab of this fish that you don't even really know how to pronounce the name of with some raw onion and horseradish, there's not many palates that are going to like gravitate to that and be like, I want it. But like I said, when we do that burger with it and we griddle it fresh, the force meat, or when we do the fried version, it just, we can't make enough.
Yeah.
We can't make enough.
Fantastic.
So,
it's old world.
Yeah.
But yeah, it makes it approachable for people who have no idea which honestly I would say that is probably a pretty good analogy for a lot of what you guys do. In terms of you're taking a lot of these old timey things and breathing new life into them, things that could be lost to time if you guys aren't doing it.
I mean, I think our matzo ball soup is another prime example of that. Yeah. So most of the time we're either using schmaltz or rendered beef fat in the matzo balls. Every once in a while we forget to render some stuff and we use the vegetable oil. But so we make that from a traditional set, right? We get that animal fat in there, which is really what makes it so delicious. And historically speaking, products made with animal fat, Jews would consider vegetarian. Like if there wasn't hunks of meat or strands of meat, flesh in there, dishes made with the byproduct, something like a matzo ball or kishka, which kind of think like a matzo ball in a loaf that was made with the animal fat and then had like a bunch of diced up vegetables for garnish in it. Some people would have little pieces of meat in their kishka, others wouldn't. But kishka was traditionally a vegetarian dish, even though it was made with schmaltz or beef fat.
When I always think of, of course, the famous Polish song, "Who Stole the Kishka?" Never knew what it was.
Frankie.
I just assumed it was sausage or something. So, Something I would be sad if was stolen. So.
Yeah. So looking at the matzo balls and incorporating the animal fat in there, our stock is always a little different. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's some beef bones in with the chicken. Sometimes there's some pork, some lamb. It just depends. We're just using what we have on hand at a given moment. But most of the matzo ball soups I have, yes, they're delicious. They're chickeny. The stock's good. It's bold. But they're not balanced. They just feel really one note. Mm-hmm. So we started working in rye bread into our matzo meal set, which helped bolden the flavor along with the animal fats and the matzo ball. And then we garnish our soup with a ton of fresh herbs, dill, scallions, parsley, and we put sauerkraut in it. I feel like when you have a rich soup, a really good well-made stock, like a good chicken stock or a beef stock, it can almost be too rich. And if there's no contrasting flavors or textures in there, it's just can be like one note, and you may enjoy it, but you're not going to enjoy it as much as you could enjoy it. So getting that crunchy sauerkraut in there with the tang, and we make our sauerkraut from red cabbage, so it turns the broth this beautiful like rosé, ruby color. It just works out really nice.
Yeah, and you're in Cleveland, so sauerkraut is widely accepted in these parts.
That's right.
I'd be remiss. I can tell you a couple times of note. We had a group from Red Rooster in Miami, in Ohio last week, and Tristan Epps, who's the chef there. It's a Marcus Samuelson concept. Fantastic place.
Which I've eaten at the original. One of my buddies opened the original with Marcus.
Harlem, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's fantastic. But he had mentioned that he has this book called Koji Alchemy on his shelf. When we were, I think it was...
I have one on my shelf,
You have one as well, right? So our buddy Jeremy Ford down in Miami was in Ohio, and he actually had to leave early, was so bummed because he didn't realize that we were coming to the place owned by the guy who writes Koji Alchemy, which he also prescribes to. So many chefs have Koji Alchemy. This is your book. Tell us about this. I mean, it's been, a couple years since it came out, mm-hmm. and, it has become one of the most revered... I hesitate to call it a cookbook because that's probably understating it. But, did you envision that it would take off like it has?
No. So first, it's a book that I wrote with one of my closest friends and just a brilliant culinarian, Richard Shee. Great guy. He's up in the Boston area. And neither of us expected it to be what it became. Our intent from the beginning with it too was to kind of coming back to these modern sensibilities built on archaic tradition. We really wanted to frame it within the modern world and how it's used. Koji, so for those that don't know what it is, it's a mold native to Asia. It is used, you grow it on different foods, and it helps break the foods down in very delicious ways. And you use it traditionally to make miso and sake and soy sauce. You literally can't make those foods without this mold. It's that important. And those three things, rice alcohol, soybean-based sauce, and a soybean-based paste, you find in every Asian country, from India to Japan, Mongolia, even parts of Russia, going down to the Philippines and Malaysia. You find these products all over. The majority of the world lives there. These are really important foods. And here, us, two boys from Northeast Ohio in corn and beef country, you got soy sauce at your house.
Amen.
I've got it at my house. I don't know anybody that does it. Yeah. These foods have literally conquered the world. So, we set out, we didn't want to write, as you kind of said, a cookbook. Mm-hmm. Because with a cookbook, you're being given somebody's very specific ways of doing things, right? A dish they created, which is fantastic. And I have so many cookbooks, and my wife yells at me all the time about how big my library is. I love them for many reasons, but they don't give me personal reflection and insight to who I am as a culinarian. They're not giving me the ground, basic, foundational skills to be able to take whatever ingredients and create however I want to. Because a cookbook is going to say you need 1 pound of this, a tablespoon of this, this, do this in this order, there's the dish. Yeah. We wanted to approach cooking from a way that, really just puts the ball in your court. So like, if we have a recipe in there, we say protein. We don't necessarily say a specific bean or a cut of meat or whatever it is. We say protein because the whole idea is protein to you, to me, to a chef in Mexico City, to a home enthusiast in Berlin, to a sake brewer in Japan. Like it's all going to be different based on the locales we are and what's a staple for us in our individual diets. So if we got people to kind of understand this vagueness and that they could take that into whatever realm of creativity they wanted based on the cultural lens that they were viewing the information through and the gastronomic culture that they were coming from, that the sky's the limit. Yeah. And we haven't really seen a lot of books on food written in that way. There's definitely a few. Kenshi Lopez Alt, great publications. Some of the stuff that comes out of the Cooks Illustrated group and Cook Science, like they're really fantastic with that. Simon Norsett's book is great. Like there are some really good books out there, but we were tackling a subject that none of them were tackling. We weren't tackling of like how to cook and like here's all the methods that you can use to cook off a New York strip steak. Mm-hmm. We're looking at how we can use this very specific mold or species of groupings of molds to create the most delicious food possible. And that's kind of what we set out to do. So the reception has just been, it's just continually mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's incredible, and I noticed yesterday, actually, just kind of in preparation for coming up here, there was a time, because I remember the time, where if you typed into Google, Koji, right, your face popped up, right, immediately. As at the time, one of the few people who were sort of dabbling in this. If you do it now, there are a lot of people who are on board with this. And I can list a whole lot of chefs who are
insane.
It's including our buddy who we were just talking about, Vinoy Rogers.
Yeah.
This movement. I mean, do you take a certain kind of pride in the fact that you've helped spread this gospel?
So I've been asked that a few times, and my brain doesn't necessarily work that way. Mm-hmm. I'm just glad to see people using it. Like I don't necessarily look at it as like, oh, Rich and I did this thing and put it out there and like you're all inspired by it. I just kind of see more people using it, more people embracing it, being in love with it, like enjoying its deliciousness. And that's like the aspect of it that I see. And that to me, I think is fantastic. Yeah. When we can have an ingredient, right, that can be universally applied to any cuisine from any corner of the world, mm-hmm. and create a more delicious version of any native food that may be produced, like what's not to love about that? Yeah. Whether you're putting it on a steak here in beef country, or you're dressing up your tacos with it for El Pastor down in Mexico, like it just doesn't matter. It works universally across all cuisines. And the wonderful thing is while it is reflective of the cultures that it came from, mm-hmm. just because you're using some sort of Koji application in Mexico City doesn't necessarily mean that you're like doing hybrid Asian food. Yeah. You're just being woke to what they have been woke to for thousands of years. And there's a reason that all these different countries and cultures in Asia have used it, because they found out that it can be universally applied. Yeah. Whatever food you're making, you introduce that mold into it, it's going to be more delicious.
Yeah. Well, it's incredible. Obviously you guys, it's a major element to your ability to take to put pastrami from raw to on the plate in less than 5 days, 4 days, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Obviously, one of my favorite things that I ever saw was years ago when you guys did a brejola, eye of round, in 2 weeks with it, and it stuck out to me because we make
was charcuterie.
Yeah, we make our own brejola. Brejola's classically a 6 week.
Yeah.
Period. You did it in 2 weeks. Tried them side by side. They were indistinguishable. I mean, the things that you guys are doing with this continue to kind of blow my mind. And for me, there's a natural leaching over into a discussion about dry aging. You walk into Larder downstairs. Obviously, you guys have been dry aging stuff in one way, shape, or another since you opened. But you have the big dry ager down there now.
It's beautiful and such a cool company.
Yeah.
If I could just say thank you to Dry Ager right now.
Yeah.
You know, and any, I mean, it says right on there, built for beef.
Mm-hmm.
You know, any beef aficionado or, you know, any meat lover that loves butchery, whether duck is your thing or certified Angus beef is your thing,
mm-hmm.
like this is such an amazing piece of equipment.
Yeah.
It's really, you know, it's one of those things that makes me look at, I'm living in the future, man. I'm you know, that whole Back to the Future too. Like I'm there. You know, it's happening, and to give, you know, because let's face it, chefs face hurdles of bureaucracy with opening a restaurant, food service, the health department, you know, all this stuff. There's a lot there. Mm-hmm. So to have a piece of equipment that is set it and forget it for something that the bureaucracy is not thrilled that you're doing. Yeah. I mean, it's game-changing, it's life-saving, all of the above.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a beautiful display piece in the dining room.
Yeah.
You know, I know, I could imagine some people being a little off-putting, seeing like big hunks of meat and, you know, stuff hanging in a cabinet when they're eating their sandwich. Especially like today, you walked in, we had just gotten some chuck rolls in there. Yeah. You know, so they look pretty bright and red, and you know, that's a little off-putting for some people.
Well, you know, I imagine you guys do have some vegetarians who come in here. Right?
Yeah, I've got vegan bologna, you know, on the menu today. Like, you know, let's be straight up with that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's gorgeous to have it in the dining room and people being connected with their food and seeing where it comes from. And, you know, if we put a whole animal in there that has its head on it still, like, you need to know more than ever. We need to know where our food comes from and why it comes from where it comes.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like, you know, our mutual friend, our old meat scientist, Dr. Phil Bass, used to talk about it. It feels like there is a generation that is now so far removed from the farm that we forget that, like, animals once had bones, right? I mean, this is, to get a bone-in steak, you know, a science has said, well, it doesn't actually affect the flavor, but the cool factor, because nobody sees meat with bones on you, because nobody is as connected as where their food used to come from. It's still a revolutionary thing.
I mean, it blows my... And I'm a bone eater.
Yeah.
But the Umanskys... There is not a single member of my family or my extended family that does not eat whatever bone, from chicken to a steak, whatever, literally, like, cracking the bones, sucking the marrow out, eating the cartilage off the end. Like, that's how you eat. Yeah. But I don't see many people. My wife doesn't eat that way. Mm-hmm. My wife's not a bone eater. Literally, like, when we eat dinner at home, and if we have something that's bone in, she will literally, like, save her bones on her plate. Yeah. And I have to remember to eat a little less because I still have her bones to clean.
It's fantastic. So you just eat it just as it is.
Yeah.
Cracked it, right?
Yeah.
It's like opening an oyster.
Right? And, you know, honestly, too, some things like certain chicken bones and whatnot, mm-hmm. I think are edible foods in themselves. Yeah. You know, we've done dishes where we, you know, with chicken feet, where we developed a way to cook them and serve them and everything where no suck and spit. Yeah. You eat the bone and everything.
And it's all edible.
It's all edible. And there's no, you know, we do it in a way where there's no sharp pieces and that sort of thing. Yeah. So, like, bones are food also, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, shoot, we've extracted the goodness from them for so long for different things, right?
Yeah.
Why not do it in their entirety? You know, you mentioned, and this is, I'm going to tell you, this is one time, I can't believe that I'm asking this question, but I do think that it's fascinating, and I always like to hearken back to the old adage that when, you know, restaurants have vegetarian options on the menu, I always like to remind my coworkers that vegetarians have wallets too. Them
and vegans.
Yes, that's right. You know, and so we never ever want to disparage those folks. But what you guys do is revolutionary. When I think of things like, you mentioned your vegan bologna.
Yeah. I'm gonna pull up a picture of it right now too to show you too, because I mean, you look at this and I don't know, man. That
looks pretty good.
That looks like a Lebanon bologna right there.
Yeah.
You know?
You got the color right. You got the fat specks.
Yeah.
But what's it made of?
So this is made of vital wheat gluten, which they when you mix vital wheat gluten with water into a meat substitute, they call seitan.
Okay.
So this is vital wheat gluten.
Wait a minute. So meat substitute is called Satan, is what I just gathered from that.
Yes. I guess it depends on your accent, but yes.
All right, carry on.
Seitan, Satan, the lines blur. But yeah, so we use the vital wheat gluten. There's tofu in it, spices, liquid smoke for now, but we're going to be transitioning them to the actual smoker soon. And then most batches I kind of mess around with the spices. Like, do I want it to have more of the classic bologna set, with a little nutmeg in there, maybe even a dash of cinnamon and the white pepper and all that? Or like this batch I did today, I was like, you know what? I'm just putting pastrami spice in here. I want to have like a little bit of black pepper punch.
Yeah.
It just differs. And then I've been working with like different garnishes too in there to kind of give it. And you look at this and you can see grains in here, little what look like hunks of fat and grains of the meat fibers and whatnot. So trying to incorporate more of those things and into there. So like the fat specks in here are like a Chinese style hard dense smoked tofu.
Yeah. And to give the texture, to give the
it gives a little difference in the bite when you eat it. And honestly, like you put this on a griddle.
Yeah.
And then you put some cheese spread with it if you're vegetarian, or you could use a vegan cheese. You put some slaw on there, some heavy mustard, and it's like, you know what?
It's as close as you can get.
Maybe this is a little different than bologna, what I'm thinking in my head.
Yeah.
But like, this tastes like a bologna sandwich and eats like it too.
Yeah.
Like
it comes close. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the goal. Like, to get everybody to a point where we eat a wider variety of foods than we do, right?
Yeah.
That's the goal. Eat plenty of fruits and vegetables, eat meat, eat seafood, but have a balanced diet, right? When you just kind of focus in on one thing, that's when we notice the health problems and economic issues associated with it, environmental and all this. And we're not going to get into this stuff much further now, but we really want to also, when we create vegan food, we're not using some of the advanced manufacturing technologies that have developed, with Impossible, with using heme and, different things and extracting it and how they're making it and extruders for muscle fibers and stuff. We're a restaurant. Like, compared to all that, we're relatively low tech. So, we're really reflective of traditional methods for creating these foods and the precedent that they set. How can we put modern sensibilities on them? How can I work this in a way where it's as close as possible to what the meat would have been, and just as delicious, And then, 5 days a week, you can have your pastrami sandwich, and on, Saturday, Sunday, you eat the vegan bologna. You get a little vegetables and a little balance, and you're good.
My life is about balance, right?
That's it.
Amen. Well, I would be remiss then if I didn't follow up a chat about a vegan bologna with proper beef, right? Your pastrami sandwich, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that I know, and I know Diana Clark is listening right now as we're talking about this, and just proud as can be. Right, everybody, it's no secret that, the volatility, especially among like proteins, right? Beef being one of them, over the past, 18, 24 months has been pretty substantial. Brisket being, probably one of the biggest ones called out, which is what that original pastrami sandwich was brisket.
Straight up.
You guys ended up changing that though, right?
Yeah.
Tell us what you...
And I think we're using bottom inside now. Or top. I always forget whether we're using bottom inside or top off the top of my head. But either way, we're using round. Like, we're using it cut off the back leg.
Yeah. Which is one of those cuts that I think people often overlook.
Yeah.
But especially from a high quality carcass,
that's the great thing about what you guys do, right? Because I know even a classically can we go a little PG-13?
Oh, absolutely.
Even taking a quote unquote cut, right? The Applebee's bistro steak, the fast casual, bang them out, don't really care,
Yep.
it's got wonderful attributes.
Yeah.
And it's delicious.
Yeah.
You know? And it boils down to it's all how you treat the base ingredient, you know? And I'll tell you what, we switched during the pandemic, and we didn't like, not that we're trying to pull the wool over people's eyes or anything, but we you know, never on our menu would it say brisket pastrami.
Yeah.
You know, it just always said pastrami.
Yeah, because pastrami truly it's the cooking method.
It's the cooking
flavor profile. It's the...
Yeah, we go back to Romania where pastrami comes from. Traditional pastramis were fowl based.
So they weren't meat
Goose,
or beef at all.
duck, turkey, those were the original ones.
Yeah.
And then as people came over to America, it morphed. And originally, one of the cuts used in America, turkey was used a lot early on, but navel, which I love. And for those of you listening that haven't worked with navel yet, would not kind of think pork belly. It comes from a slightly different place on the cow and everything, but the cross cut on it, it looks like bacon, but it's beef. For pastrami, though, it's got too much fat. Because it's like 50-50, maybe even like 60-40 fat to meat.
Yeah, at the packing level, when they want to make 50-50 trim, that's what they grind. They grind the navel because it's already there
in ratio, you know. So yeah, you know, early on testing out our methodology and our techniques and our recipe, I was exclusively using navel, and then, you know, kind of got to the point where like I enjoy the unctuousness and the over fattiness and all this. A lot of people don't. It's just too much, you know. So over time, brisket became the cut. You know, so when we switched to a different cut, I don't even feel like I necessarily like owe people an explanation or anything because it's like, well, pastrami has always been something different from its arrival in America. Yeah. You know, and we're still using beef. We're still using certified Angus. Like, it goes through the exact same process, and it eats just as good.
Yeah, I was. Has there been a noticeable difference on it? Because I ate it. I thought it was fantastic.
We actually, you know, if people come up, people that go to delis know to ask for their preference of how they like their meat, right? Do you like lean brisket? Do you like the fatty brisket? And so on and so forth, right? So with this cut now, the amount of people, there are some people that don't know to order like lean or fatty.
Yeah.
So we used to hear, not on a regular basis, but, you know, enough that people would be like, it was too fatty. Too fatty for me. And that's when we explain, well, next time ask for it lean, because otherwise this is just how it comes out, you know? With this, those complaints, I guess, have almost gone away.
Yeah, it's one big muscle. Yeah.
So, you know, less trim for us and everything. And we square off that we butcher it down, you know, the cut down, and we square it off, and we have trim for grind and that sort of thing too, you know. But it's pretty much a plug and play cut.
Yeah.
When it comes to barbecuing and smoking, because that's really what pastrami is like. You know, it's akin to what the pitmasters are doing. Like, it's just kind of the Jewish version. Yeah. You know.
Yeah.
So it's you know, if you work with the cut, if you love it, if you treat it right,
it's going to be there for you.
It's going to be there.
It's fantastic.
It's going to be there. You know, and the price on that cut tends to be more stable. Yeah. It's a bigger cut essentially than brisket. There's more encompassing that whole round area, right, than just the brisket. So more of it can go out. People like it because it's economic, and it tends to not flux in price too much because of that, because it's a good, consistent seller. Yeah. You know, something like a brisket, I mean, we saw prices go up to, I think, almost $9 a pound during the pandemic at one point. It was very short-lived that it was that high. But it was like, I remember calling you up and being like, what's going on?
Yeah, well, it is.
And you're like, well, we don't control this aspect of it. And I was like, I know.
Oh, yeah. But you know, if we have a past episode, I invite everybody to go back and check it out. It's with Daniel Vaughn, the barbecue editor of Texas.
Barbecue snob, man.
And he talks about...
You know, we've fed him a few times.
Did you?
He's got family that I believe is down by you.
Wait, he's from Worcester. He's a Worcester high school graduate, like a mile from our office.
So, pandemic aside, I believe he comes up like once a year or so, and he always pops in.
It's fantastic. It's so good. But he talked about, you know, with brisket prices, you know, not only were you dealing with the pandemic, but you have the, you know, Arby's, who has now doubled down on the availability of brisket on their menu. Chipotle. All these national chains are now getting on that barbecue wagon and putting a huge amount of pressure on brisket.
Well, and I think, but it's not just that; it's the home market too, because brisket has become the beef equivalent of like pork shoulder.
Yeah.
Like, what's the standard for pork barbecue?
Yeah.
It's shoulder.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's where all
pulled
the fatty
pork,
deposits are. Yeah.
And I brisket is a kind of similar ratio of fat to meat. The muscle, I'm sure Di's gonna correct me on this, but in my eyes, just thinking where it is on the animal, like pork shoulder and brisket, I think they're used enough, similar tenderness and whatnot. That's why both you just cook for forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think people were always looking for something else, and now we have these great pellet grills people can get at home, and like you can really be a amateur pitmaster at your house
pretty
now.
Good smoked brisket at home now. Yeah.
You can with these grills that really aren't that expensive when you think about them. For a couple $100 more you can get one of those compared to just a regular nice grill. And it's leaps and bounds ahead.
Gravity fed Traegers. It's
so
incredible.
I think that if you're an at-home enthusiast, right, and you're cooking, you're really into grilling and barbecue, that brisket's the one.
Oh gosh, yeah.
The one you want to do. So I think there's a lot of that home market is really, really coming in. I mean, my buddies and my friends, I hear from them all the time, like, hey, I'm going to get a brisket. What do you think? Should I do this with it, that? I'm going to put it on a smoker for this amount of time. I'm going to marinate it first. I'm going to, and that's what I get the most questions of from my friends.
Of what
it's
to
like,
do with the brisket.
what to do with the brisket on the grill.
Which is funny because it really is probably, one of the most challenging cuts to cook, because especially if you get a whole pack of brisket.
Muscle runs in different directions.
Yeah, I mean, guys, you can make this so much easier on yourself if you maybe use something from around.
Which, and from that standpoint, I feel when it comes to charcuterie, there's no greater cut on a cow than brisket for charcuterie.
Yeah.
And I challenge any culinarian who makes charcuterie listening to this to create a prosciutto, a traditional pork, or like something out of another animal that's prosciutto-esque, and put it up against a dry cured, aged brisket.
Oh yeah.
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's so good. The fat consistency is perfect.
And so many of us have really never had beef charcuterie.
Yeah,
right. It's used a lot in the Middle East and other parts of the world where they're known. Turkey is really known. So sausages like sucuk, which are all beef and whatnot. They're really well known for it. But the areas of the world that we think of that are like the charcuterie makers, right? That ring around the Mediterranean.
Yep.
You don't really see much beef. Like Italy, up in South Tyrol, you have speck, you have a couple of things, but outside of that, you don't see it. So when you eat that for the first time, brisket charcuterie, it's just so mind-blowing. And everything about all your past experiences with eating different types of prosciutto and so on and so forth, it's like, wow, this is as good or better, yet it's beef.
Yeah. It's fantastic. Tony Biggs makes a fantastic. He used to use the kula, but he would treat it like salmon gravlax.
Yeah.
Same. And then he switched to use the brisket flat now, and it's so good, and it's fairly simple to execute as well. So yeah, big fan of that. All right, last question, because I know you got to run, and I've got to roll fairly soon as well. Cleveland, right? Of course, we're big homers. I'm from Northeast Ohio. You're from Northeast Ohio. The culinary scene in Cleveland, much like the culinary scene in a lot of cities, right, has changed dramatically.
And you travel for work.
Yeah.
You are literally immersed in the food scenes of every city in the country. Yeah. I know where you go.
I try and eat as much as I can.
Yeah.
But Cleveland is one where obviously we're homers, right? We're from here, and the Cleveland culinary scene, obviously if you go back 10 years, it was sort of like everybody was kind of having this epiphany that like, wow, there's so much going on here. Obviously, Greenhouse Tavern was in its heyday. Lola was doing its thing. You look at Cleveland now, especially coming out of, the pandemic and everything. Michael Simon is no longer a Cleveland resident. Jonathan Sawyer is no longer a Cleveland resident. Michael Ruhlman is no longer a Cleveland resident. But the culinary scene here, it seems like, is doing just fine for the most part.
Doug Tratner is still a Cleveland restaurant.
Doug Tratner is still here.
He's definitely still here. Well, Doug Katz too.
Doug Katz
both of them.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. I throw Tratner in there.
I love Doug Tratner. Is
how many best-selling cookbooks has he written?
Every Simon cookbook plus.
That's right.
Yeah. Doug Tratner is a legend.
Yeah.
But I mean, can you talk about that? It seems like a lot of those guys. Obviously, there's a lot of lineage back through the Greenhouse Taverns, the Trentinas of the world. Obviously, you guys. Adam Bauer down the street, the Sawyer boy, other Sawyer boys, Brett Sawyer, and that crew had a good company.
And Simon has had his,
Yeah, so, I mean, give us an update on what's going on in the Cleveland scene. It seems like it seems like pretty much everywhere I've gone, places are busy again. People are coming back.
Part of it, too, is, the pandemic's winding down, hopefully it's going to be gone, but... Also, that's happening at the same time spring is coming.
Yeah.
And you know better than anybody, if it is 45 degrees or above and it's March in Northeast Ohio, what are people wearing?
Shorts, and the window on the car is rolled down, right? Because that's summertime, right?
We're getting this. So people are still, the dwindling of the pandemic, and then, this yearly spring resurgence is kind of happening at the same time. So... Yeah. I'm not holding my breath yet that we're through this. I'm just,
Yeah.
But, Cleveland's the biggest small town in the country. Midwestern vibe and values when it comes to pleasantries and, how people interact. There are out there, but generally speaking, you can't walk down the street here without someone saying hello.
Yeah.
And you have no clue who they are. Most places, I lived in New York City for a long time. That happens in New York. People are like, keep walking, bud.
What's the matter with
you? You want my wallet? What's going on? But here it's totally different. So, throw everything that we have culturally in here. So we have these great natural resources. We're right on Lake Erie. Right below us is a beautiful national park. We have all this beautiful farmland, agricultural areas, and wild spaces, and it hasn't been as developed as some other major metropolitan areas. So that's one great thing. Within 30 minutes, you could be in complete forest, heavy forest, or farmland, from downtown Cleveland. So we have this diversity of landscape. We have the lake as a resource. We have great rivers. On top of that, we have chefs. Cleveland has been a quote-unquote underdog for when did the river burn last? 1972, something like that. I think 72 might have been the big burn. Mistake on the Lake, the Dirty Place, the Rust Belt. So long there's been so much negative connotation. And Clevelanders have known since we got our act together and started cleaning up the river, which is a success story now and everything, 50 years later. Clevelanders have always known how great it is here. But I think other people are starting to notice. Yeah. People have been like, you know what? We had a reporter a couple of years ago from London come in and shadowed around with me for a little bit. And his big thing was, he's like, I travel all over the world. He's like, I've never been to a city with so much individual city pride. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, all these people walking around with t-shirts that say Cleveland, this and that. And, it's a peach, it's a plum, it's a,
Yeah.
And he's like, they're not tourists that just bought t-shirts and wearing them home. This is like the people here showing the pride in, where they're from and what they are.
Yeah.
And he said, I've really never seen that anywhere else in the world. And I was like, oh, that's because Cleveland's awesome.
Yeah, it's a good point. I don't know anybody who this time of year when it rolls around and praise the Lord, spring training is happening right now, but I think everybody goes back and watches Major League, this time of year because it's 100%. Yeah.
100%. I couldn't agree more, But, then you parlay that into the culinary scene, right? We had Chef Sawyer here, Chef Simon, and there's other great Chef Karen Small, who's been cooking here. Doug Katz, Jill Veda. Like, we have names of Chef Eric Williams. Like, all of these chefs have been Beard nominees at one point or another in their careers. Some of them have won. Like, we're talking that there are diehard, life-committed, serious culinarians here who are spreading their craft as far and wide as they can. And they have chefs that work with them and under them and then go on to do their own things. They have diners that are consistently coming in and they want to see what the chef's doing next, or they just want to be comforted by what they know is delicious, and they can go to that chef and get what they love.
The goat cheese guac all day long.
It's really, really fantastic. And as someone who has, worked in other markets, major markets and some smaller markets, the conviviality amongst the culinarians here, it's insane. Other markets are so cutthroat that it's like people are sabotaging each other and talking crap behind each other's backs and all this stuff. And I'm not going to say that doesn't happen here, but generally speaking, all the culinarians get along and like have this level of respect for what everybody's doing. You will have people come into the restaurant and they'll be like, I'm in town for a couple days or whatever, and right away we start listing off, like, we're like, go to Salt, go to Momocho, go see the national park. Here's a couple fun things to do while you're here too. But like, we're like, no, you have to eat this chef's food and that chef's food. Oh, definitely go to Zug and all of these things. So I don't feel that you necessarily get that in a lot of other markets.
In fact, I know you don't get it in a lot of other cities.
Yes.
One of the things that makes it very special here. That said, Jeremy Umansky, before we let you go, can you give us some plugs? Where can people find you? Where can people follow you?
You can find me Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at TM Gastronaut. Spelled like astronaut, but with, gastro as in gastronomy. Can find me there. Come find me at the restaurant. Been keeping a little bit of a lower profile as of recent. We had a baby in September, so just this is probably the last one we're going to have, so I'm just soaking up all the snuggles I can right now. I go home, I set the phone to do not disturb, and I hold the baby, and I just smother her. So, but yeah, those are the places. Or come visit us at Larder.
Outstanding. Jeremy Umansky, brother, thanks for taking time, man.
Brian Chef, always a good one.
Excellent. If this is your first time listening to the Meat Speak podcast, you can catch across all of your major podcasting platforms: Google Play, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Actually, if you have the Apple Podcast, which apparently is what the vast majority of people have, hit the little purple icon. That's the podcast icon. You can go and leave it not just leave it a subscribe, but also a star ranking. Leave a little review there as well. And if it's funny, we'll totally read it. Unfortunately, I did not consult our reviews before walking here. Otherwise, I would have something to read. That said, until next time, on behalf of meat scientist Diana Clark, Chef Tony Biggs, for the Certified Angus Beef Man, I am Brian Shaw. Thanks for listening.